We are all familiar with the modern tech keynote. The lights drop, a sleek graphic hits the screen, and a packed auditorium leaps to its feet in a wave of coordinated applause. But the blueprint for this specific type of corporate theater wasn't written recently. It was engineered 4 decades ago. The morning of January 24, 1984, arrived cold in Cupertino, California. Apple CEO John Sculley was awake before 5. He was experiencing the restlessness of someone who has prepared for an event so thoroughly that the preparation itself prevents rest. Lying in the dark, Sculley wasn't thinking about whether the computer would work. His anxiety was focused on the room itself. Every variable of the impending presentation had been mapped and rehearsed to ensure the 2,500 people inside reacted exactly as intended. The Macintosh served as the physical anchor for this experiment. Sculley knew that every detail, from the sequence of events to the specific language the machine would speak, had been calibrated to trigger a specific, collective response. Steve Jobs was about to manufacture a flawless emotional response from his audience. Yet that absolute mastery over a controlled environment created a potent illusion. A perfect launch can easily mask the unforgiving reality of the open market. To build this environment, Jobs selected the Flint Center for the Performing Arts. He didn't choose it for its prestige. He chose it because of its physical architecture and what it could do to a crowd when something unexpected happened. The room allowed Jobs to arrange 2,500 people in total darkness, oriented toward a single illuminated point. When an entire room looks in the same direction, the crowd stops acting like individuals and responds as a single unit. When Jobs stepped into that spotlight, he was wearing a double-breasted suit and a bow tie. Through his clothes, he was non-verbally communicating that this moment deserved formality, that it possessed enough historical weight to be worth that kind of acknowledgement. He began with a slow, 3-minute history lesson. He talked about 1958, when IBM missed the shift from vacuum tubes to transistors, and 1968, when they missed mini-computers. He framed the industry not through technology, but through a story of dominant institutions failing to see the future. By the time he reached IBM's entry into the personal computer market, Jobs had framed the competition as a battle between centralization and liberation. He positioned the upcoming product as a tool for the individual to use against the people who had always controlled access to information. These spatial and narrative choices functioned as isolation variables. By the time the machine appeared, the audience was no longer evaluating a consumer product. They were participating in the resolution of a decades-long conflict. Jobs understood that a crowd in a dark room is not a collection of individuals. It is a single organism. And like any organism, it responds to specific signals if they are seated correctly. The event team had distributed highly passionate Apple employees in strategic locations throughout the room. By positioning the people most susceptible to response in a distributed pattern, they ensured that any emotional reaction would propagate outward and become contagious. Then came the climax. Jobs pulled the Macintosh from a canvas bag and let it speak for itself. Its synthesized voice filled the auditorium with words chosen with absolute deliberateness. After the demonstration, Jobs simply stood beside the machine in the spotlight and said nothing. He allowed the room to respond. By remaining silent, he removed the role of the salesman and forced the audience to react from raw emotion. The auditorium erupted. 2,500 people surged to their feet in the dark, reacting from a register below rational evaluation. They were witnessing a sudden revision of what was technologically possible. Standing in the front row, even John Sculley felt a response that his training had not insulated him against. The engineered emotional mechanics had bypassed his analytical mind, capturing him just as thoroughly as everyone else in the room. There is a specific management danger in a perfect launch. A presentation that generates a standing ovation creates a new baseline for the entire company. Every subsequent moment is measured against that single peak. This chart shows the primary conflict. The launch is a controlled, closed environment filled with a curated audience, but the market is chaotic. It is driven by customers with fixed budgets and practical needs that do not bend to the force of a vision. The applause in the auditorium was real, but it could not predict if those clappers would spend $2,000 on the machine. The gap between what a perfect launch promises and what the market delivers is where many extraordinary products begin to fracture. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Jobs moved through the crowd, finding the engineers who had built the hardware. He offered precise validation, acknowledging exactly what their contributions had cost to produce. In the first few weeks, orders met every projection. The early adopters, those who decided to buy before walking into a store, arrived immediately. Jobs viewed these numbers as the beginning of a permanent revolution. But as Jobs celebrated, Scully began to calculate the rate of decay.